Michael has helped bring several innovative medicines to the market, market authorization. He has developed efficient risk management measures in oncology and CNS therapy areas in particular. The focus of his discussion is going to be the implications of the recent CIOMS XII Working Group guidance. See, that's going to mean something to some of you. Clinical development and also for post-marketing. So that's something that hopefully, who in the room is excited to stay and listen to that one? Yes! Woohoo! Michael, you have a lot of followers. It's brilliant. So, in room 33, which is stream number 2, we will have Phyllis Shepherd. Where's Phyllis? Phyllis Shepherd. Way, welcome, Phyllis. So Phyllis is going to talk about, and I have it on her own authority that this is fascinating, and I don't know what it is, so I'm sure it is, GCP risk in clinical trials. Yes? Okay, so Phyllis is an experienced GCP auditor and trainer, so if you don't know about this and would like to, she can train you in this. She has led a broad portfolio of global phase 1 to 4 audits. She has done regulatory inspections, inspection readiness, and risk-based QMS initiatives. The focus of her discussion or presentation is going to be, are the R3 risk requirements truly driving quality, or are they just kind of a tick box? So if that's something that excites you, who's excited by that? You've got woo, several people, woohoo! Okay, so you will be standing up shortly and making your way again through the double doors, past the reception, as if you're going to the loo, but then you do a handbrake turn off to the left, okay, squiggle. So, can I ask those who are going to be in room 33 with Phyllis to please stand up and follow her to that room? After that presentation is finished, there will be a break, which is back in here. So we will see those of you that are leaving us back in here after that presentation.
Can we leave our...
Yes, you may, please, yeah. Of course, you can leave your stuff here. Yes. Both are going to be recorded. Good question. Yeah. If you're interested in both are being recorded. Yeah. So it's just, who do you want to see in person? Although Michael's virtual. And who do you want to watch later? Bedtime viewing. Yes, I will do the lights. Okay. Do we have Michael? We can see Michael at the back there. So I'm just going to turn this down and hand you over to Michael. Thank you. Round of applause for Michael.
Thanks for the introduction, and sorry I cannot be in London today. I had planned to be there, and there were some circumstances that prevented me from traveling, unfortunately, and I unfortunately couldn't have overcome that. So, at least I'm glad I can present virtually and discuss a little bit on one of my favorite topics, benefit risk management, and the CIOMS guidance. So I guess that for most of you, CIOMS means something, and I don't have to explain what this is. Benefit risk management is a topic, an important topic. Let's see where we arrive today. CIOMS guidance. Some people think that guidances are like cookbooks, and you get a recipe for everything. And unfortunately, this is not the case. The guidances are, well, guidelines. They give you some framework, they give you some ideas, but then you are free to play, and you're free to do whatever you think is correct. And there's a lot of freedom to experiment. And interpreting the guidances, whether this is CIOMS XII or any other, requires a certain amount of reflection and going deeper. So, guidances and recipes. One of the reasons why you cannot have a cookbook in the guidance is that the ingredients for your dish, they're always changing. So it is maybe the same dish in the end, but you always have to adapt to new situations. And this doesn't even include the boundary conditions that you have, like different ovens or different cookware. So be aware of that. Whatever I'm going to tell you today is not a collection of recipes, and the guidance isn't, but it can help you explore and cook. Right, so this is what the guidance looks like. It was published in 2025 after long deliberations, many discussions, and it built on an earlier benefit risk guidance that the CIOMS had published. Now, the interesting part, the most important changes that that are being presented in CIOMS XII is that benefit risk management is being considered a life cycle approach. Now, for those of you who think, well, that's always been a life cycle approach, you are right. However, if you go back to about 10 to 15 years to IMI Protect, the considerations about benefit risk management were very much focused on post-authorization activities. So you were, the guidances, all the considerations were about there is a product on the market, there are certain risks, that we know something about the benefits, now let's analyze that. So it was really a post-authorization activity. Whereas with CIOMS XII, we are taking benefit risk management and assessment to much earlier in the product lifecycle. And we'll discuss later on how this may look like. The other clear aim of this guidance is to support decision making and communication about benefits and risks. I'm not going to explain different chapters here. The guidance can be downloaded from the CIOMS website. It can also be bought, very easy to access, and of course to read. And I highly recommend for anybody who hasn't read it yet, download it, print it, or read it on a reader, and read it carefully. There's a lot of information there. Let's go back to concepts. The concept of benefit risk management. If you think about benefit risk management or risk management, it is one of these activities that are like gardening. You only notice them really if they are not being done well. And if you do it well, you have a nice garden, and people will think, oh, this is wonderful and beautiful, but they will never realize how much work goes into this. And benefit risk management is a little bit like that. You have to use your time and dedicate your efforts in a concerted way to really make the garden bloom, or to make sure that the benefits outweigh the risks. Which means also you cannot spend an unlimited amount of time and effort. It's right. Our time, our funds are limited, and we have to make the best of it, and we have to find approaches that are adequate to the benefits and the risks. If we think further about the concept of benefit risk management, there is something you should always keep in mind when discussing benefits and risks, and especially risk management. Benefits and risks very often are just two sides of the same coin. If you think about what I'm showing you here on this slide, you have a fuel, wood in this case, which is flammable, which is an inherent quality of wood, right? If you bring this flammable material in contact with an ignition source, the match here, yeah, you can have different outcomes. You can either have a very nice cozy fire at which you can warm yourself in winter, or you can have a fire burning down your house. Now, what is the risk in this picture? Is it the wood? Probably not, right? Because the capability of wood to work as a fuel is an inherent property which is required and necessary for you to have a fire in the fireplace. Which means that if you think about your risk management activity, you cannot simply say, how we have the risk of flammability for that wood is an inflammable material. Because if you engineer that away by any means, you will not achieve any benefit. The same is true for many of our drugs. I remember about 15 years ago, 14, I worked on a drug which was a mitotic spindle inhibitor. So interfering with cell division at a very, very basic stage. The problem with it, and that drug worked very well on different cancers. The problem with the drug was that because of this interference with mitosis, it had a huge teratogenic potential. Now, teratogenicity is like the inflammability of the wood here, right? It's an inherent feature. We cannot get rid of it. If we get rid of that, we have no drug. So the risk management measure has to concentrate on what is the outcome and to balance the benefit that is obtained by that is inherent property with the risk that is caused by the same property. So you have to be very careful in looking at what actually is the benefit and the risk. And now coming back to CIOMS and the approach to risk management, or benefit risk management, you have to think about what are the uncertainties around these outcomes. We know they could both occur. We hope that the beneficial outcome will occur if you treat the patient. But what are the uncertainties? What do we not know? And this is something that CIOMS XII is focusing on heavily. And that is a core thought in benefit risk assessment. Benefit risk management is something that is very common. We do this all the time. We do it instinctively. And the principle is very simple. We do something, we perform some activity, considering the benefit, considering the risks, weighing them up against each other and acting accordingly. Like in this picture, if you look at these three men, obviously somewhere in the bank area in London, they want to cross the street to go to this bar. Obviously there is a benefit going to the bar. There's a risk, for example, being run over by a car. Each of them can make the decision instinctively without a lot of thinking. But the problem starts when you think about, okay, there are three of them. Each one of them may have different value systems, different idea about the benefit, a different idea about the risk, about how they judge it, how complex they think it could be. One of them may be afraid of meeting the boss at the bar. Some other may rather want to speak with this lady coming from the other side. So every person here has their own interpretations, their own considerations about the benefits and the risks. And that makes benefit risk assessments difficult because we have different stakeholders and every single assessment is in principle correct. We just have to make sure we understand the value systems behind it, we understand the data that go into the assessment and the interpretation of the benefit risk profile. For those of you who've been around for a while, you all know these FDA submission documents, for example, where you have lots of tables, and in some table it says efficacy endpoints, and you see the differences between the drug that you want to have approved and placebo control, and then many tables later you have another table that describes some adverse events that have been reported, again comparing your drug and your placebo. And then many tables and pages later there's a summary statement that somehow says, in summary, the benefits of the drug have been demonstrated. And the overall benefit risk assessment is therefore favorable. But why this is the case, you don't know. It's you get different tables. You don't see how this compares. You don't understand how the observed treatment effects translate into clinical terms. You don't know anything about uncertainty. And by all means, you do not see why this efficacy would offset the harms. Now, also not completely new, there are of course different ways of showing such data, and this is one of the first ones actually. I think it was the first one where this was demonstrated in that way at an FDA AdCom hearing for drug development for kidney transplantation, where, without going into details here, it's not important, the reviewers found this slide, this representation of benefits and risks in a forest plot to be really informative, because it shows the net benefits and the risks, giving some point estimates about the risks and also the uncertainties around those, showing very clearly why the new drug was, for most of the endpoints, a clinical improvement over the existing standard of care cyclosporine A at the time. And since then, it was from around 2010, since then many of these representations have been used to show benefits and risks in an integrated way. And I'm sure you all know this, you've seen this representation of the forest plot, which is one of the favorite ways of showing the benefit-risk profile, because it is so intuitive. And I mentioned before IMI Protect and the benefit-risk methodologies that have been described there, and those of you who have seen that before, you've certainly seen all these different frameworks. The interesting part here is that all these frameworks, most of them, except for very few, are based on multi-criteria decision analytic approaches. There are decision analytic approaches that use a very structured way of defining decisions around benefits and risks. And the common elements are all the same. You select the elements of benefits and risks and try to find out how to capture uncertainty, and then try to find out which perspectives you want to consider. Are you going to look at that, for example, from the regulatory perspective, because you want to use this for a submission, or do you want to use it look at it from the patient perspective, because you want to place your product in the market well, etc., etc. Then you use different methods to synthesize different outcomes, show some metrics. If you have enough data, and then communicate the benefit-risk analysis results. All the frameworks, independent of which one you look at, they are all following this similar approach with different variations according to the taste and the favorite ways of doing it that the different teams that develop these methodologies have used. Remember the cocoa in the beginning. Now, CIOMS XII offers something new. CIOMS XII says that the benefit-risk framework can be very simple. For a structured benefit-risk framework to start with, you just need to consider first what is the product. So, what is the disease that you want to treat? What treatment options do you have at the moment? Then, what does your product profile look like? What are the key benefits and the key risks and the uncertainties around those? And how are the risks managed? And that's basically the core consideration. And then you can, of course, build on that and use all kinds of decision analytic techniques, qualitative, semi-quantitative, quantitative ones, whatever you like, based on the amount of data that you have, but the structure of the benefit-risk framework remains the same and can grow. Another point that is included here, and that I think is really, really important, is the benefit-risk conclusion. An integrated way of how are benefits outweighing the risks, why are they outweighing them, what is the strength of your evidence, and showing all the uncertainty that still exists. Because ultimately, if we perform such a benefit-risk assessment, ultimately the aim of this is to enable the person who receives that to take a conclusion on whether or not they want to do something with this information, and what they want to do with the information. So if we do this benefit-risk assessment, say, for the regulators, the assessment assessment or the conclusion is binary. Do we want to approve the drug or not? And the same goes for the patient. Do I want to take the drug or undergo the treatment or not? It's always coming down to that. So all this whole complex process ultimately has to have this ultimate aim of enabling or supporting decision making. There's some new concepts that CIOMS XII introduces. One that I like in particular are these key risks and key benefits. If you perform risk assessments regularly, or benefit risk assessments regularly, you frequently see teams struggling with prioritizing benefits and risks, and they come up with extremely long lists, which is fine, which is like having a tree, and with the concept of building this value tree where you add all kinds of benefits and all kinds of risks, like branches in a tree. That's perfectly fine to get started. But then you have to prune this tree down to the key risks, to the most important branches that are really important to support your benefit risk assessment. So this concept of key risks and key benefits is explained in CIOMS XII, the ones that make the difference. An error that's frequently made that is not explicitly stated in CIOMS XII, but if you read it and if you compare it to other documents, it becomes clear. The key risks are not necessarily the same as the important risks of the RMP, although they may overlap. It's a good starting point to consider them, but they may not always be the most important risks. What's more important even is that the risks in the benefit risk context are the managed risks. So if you think about an RMP, and you describe a risk, you describe the risk in the unmanaged state and what you are going to do about the risk in order to make it below the benefit, below the risk tolerance boundary, so that you can accept it, that you consider it well managed. In the benefit risk context, the risk or the benefit risk profile that you analyze is the profile of the drug as the patient receives it, including all the risk minimization activities. Right? So, very important consideration to make when comparing benefit, the risk management plan and the benefit risk assessment. And of course, once again, it's very frequently highlighted in the guidance that benefit risk assessment is a life cycle activity. It's not something that you do once and then move on. Now, CIOMS XII mentions the sources of uncertainties in the structured benefit risk frameworks, where they come from, where the areas, the dimensions that you should consider. And these dimensions are manifold, and they come from the product itself, from the product profile, from knowledge or lack of knowledge about patient preferences, for example, about the endpoints, about the risk tolerance of patients, about the effectiveness of your risk management options, the benefit risk trade-offs, etc., etc. The guidance offers you some framework to systematically explore these sources of uncertainties. But by all means, nothing is complete, so there may be other sources of uncertainties. The important part, like in every risk management planning, is the planning process. It's not the outcome itself, it is the fact that you bring people together who have the knowledge about these different items and openly discuss and assess the importance of these uncertainties and how this affects the benefit risk profile of the drug or treatment. Talking about structured benefit risk assessment as a life cycle activity, it is also very explicitly mentioned that the information content that you have around your benefits and risks grows along the life cycle. That also means that the methodologies that you can use change with the information, the data that are available. So in an early stage in development, you have to focus on text, you have to focus on information that you have. You don't have a lot of data yet, maybe none at all if you start with a public product profile. But you can start thinking about what are the qualia the qualities that you can put into this benefit risk framework. You can build, for example, a value tree of potential outcomes that you may want to consider as important for your benefit risk assessment. As more data become available in the clinical trial program, you get more numbers, you get more data. You can build these forest plots that I've shown you before. You can build effect tables that summarize the outcomes and the uncertainties around them. And that's what you usually have around the time of submission. And then, of course, when you have the product on the market and you collect more data, more real-world information becomes available, that's the moment when fully quantitative analysis become available. Now, it's very important to understand that even the most complicated MCDA that you can do with lots of data that you have available, patient preference information, and fully integrated and all sensitivity analysis being done, that all that started out with a very simple consideration of what are the key risks, what are the key benefits on which you build. So again, it is life cycle activity. It's much more difficult to start at this MCDA stage at the end than if you start early and build throughout the life cycle and generate knowledge along the way. CIOMS XII talks about the quantitative analysis. It's a question I hear very often when discussing with teams about MCDA. Some colleagues in the industry that think, benefit risk assessment, this is this complicated and lengthy and costly way of doing things and collecting data and comparing them and calculating. No, it's not. All the core dimensions of benefit risk frameworks are there. There's almost a decision table. You can think about these core dimensions of benefit risk frameworks that I showed you before, the analysis of the condition, the treatment options, the benefits and the risks and their management. And that develops into a benefit risk trade-off. And then you have different options. You have some options where the benefits clearly outweigh the risk. A lot of products are like that. You see, especially at the end of clinical trials, you see that the benefit is there, it is a clear treatment option. The benefit outweighs the risk. Here, you don't have to do anything more. There's a decision. You can use the product. It could be the other way around. The risks clearly outweigh the benefit, which we always hope doesn't happen, but we all know it does sometimes, which means the product can probably, even if it's well managed, the risks are well managed, cannot stay on the market. And then you have these cases of marginal or uncertain benefit risk trade-offs, where you see, yes, there is a benefit, but is it really so great that the benefits outweigh the risks? And this is the moment when quantitative analysis comes in, when you have doubts about the benefit risk trade-off. And that can come from different sources, which are to some extent described in CIOMS XII. Now, in my experience and also the experience of many colleagues who are doing this regularly and who have done this for many years, the need for performing additional quantitative analysis is relatively rare. It is at maximum 20% of all the cases. In all the other cases, the decision of whether benefits outweigh risks or risks outweigh benefits is very obvious and very clear. So going to this quantitative analysis is rarely necessary. Sometimes it is, and then you need to apply different ways of thinking. What you need for quantitative analysis for sure, and you may also need it for qualitative and semi-qualitative analysis, is what is the perspective of the patient. CIOMS XII is very explicitly mentioning this, and there are new guidances coming up from different institutions about patient input and patient preferences. there are different ways of doing it. The very interesting questions to patients are, what are important outcomes for them? What does it mean for them if a certain benefit or a certain risk occurs? What is the importance of the different attributes of benefits and risks? How does this impact the quality of life? Are there some risks which are completely unacceptable? How do we trade off benefits and risks? And then, of course, which patients do we ask and when? Is it a homogeneous patient population? Are there specific subgroups? Are there vocal minorities that shout and try to be heard? And if you do this, this can lead to very, very interesting results. And I had quite astonishing results over the years doing these patient preference studies and including those into the benefit risk frameworks. Because the outcomes that are relevant to patients very often differ dramatically from what you think is important and from what the regulators think is important. I'll give you a real world example. I worked on a product once which, as an important adverse event, or an adverse reaction, had an increase in blood pressure. And the increase was in the range of 7 to 10 millimeters systolic. And that is obviously something that caused the regulators to raise an eyebrow and, of course, think about whether this is a risk that needs to be managed well. When the benefit risk profile was put in front of the patients, none of them considered the increased blood pressure important because they said, well, if my blood pressure rises, my doctor will give me something to control it. What they were concerned about with this drug was the fact that the drug caused dry mouth. And their concern about the dry mouth was not the problem on a good decay that could concur with that, but the fact that they would have to get up at night and have disturbed sleep because they would have to wake up often and have to drink, making it more difficult for them to work the next day and live a productive life because they didn't sleep. So nobody had thought about that, I can tell you. And obviously from a regulatory perspective, regulators will still not consider the dry mouth an important risk. But it's interesting when you think about it in terms of which of the risks and the benefits do we want to consider in our benefit risk assessment, and how are we going to integrate them. CIOMS XII also talks about the different benefit risk assessment methodologies, the different study designs, and the statistical approaches that you can take to generate the data in order to inform the benefit risk assessment. A very thorough discussion. It refers a lot to the outcomes of the IMI project, the work package 5. So, of course, back then, the IMI project made a great effort and generated really interesting results. Many more data have been obtained. CIOMS XII is really summarizing and explaining that very well. There are also reference to the different considerations that you have to gain patient insights, to make them useful and valuable, how to approach the uncertainties, and how to visualize benefits and risks. I think these are extremely interesting topics. How are you going beyond, for example, the forest plot that I've showed you before? When are there options that may be more instructive and more intuitive in certain considerations? It's not always, in every situation, it's the forest plot is the best way of doing it. There's a chapter also on specific special situations for benefit risk assessment methods. The public health emergency use was certainly triggered by the COVID epidemic. And there are also considerations about approvals based on surrogate endpoints, rare diseases where you have few data, pediatric use, advanced therapy products, legacy products, and OTC products. So if you're working with any of those, there are you have to change the way or adapt the way of doing your benefit risk assessment. mostly because you simply don't have the data that you need. One important point, and I think this is important, especially if a company or department sets up a benefit risk management team. I sometimes hear from pharmaceutical companies, from colleagues there, yeah, we don't want to have another team, we don't want to have another governance structure. Now, the interesting thing is that the cross-functional benefit risk management team usually fits very well into the safety management teams and the existing governance structures that are in place. There may be additional pieces of information required as mostly ad hoc members. The most important additional capability or expertise that is required is understanding how to build benefit risk frameworks. The rest of the data that you need, the rest of the expertise that you need, comes from stakeholders within the company that usually exist. There are people in statistics or biostatistics, there are pharmacoepidemiologists who know how to deal with real-world data. There are usually people in patient affairs, med affairs, or commercial who know how to engage with patients and how to elucidate their preferences. There are data visualization specialists. Well, you sometimes may need somebody who understands decision science. But the team structure that is recommended for a cross-functional benefit risk management team is explained very well in CIOMS XII. Yeah, and then there is BRAD. So BRAD is neither big nor made now. BRAD is the benefit risk assessment document. And I think this is one of the most interesting pieces of CIOMS XII in terms of practical application. CIOMS XII suggests to use a company benefit risk assessment document a little bit like a company core data sheet, and it describes how this BRAD, this benefit risk assessment document, could be structured to address all the questions that we tried to ask in the beginning, all these dimensions that we consider for benefit risk assessment. Remember the conditions, the treatment options, the benefits, and the risks and their management. And that document offers a starting point for that and enables the early development of a risk management strategy and the implementation from the moment of just knowing about the risks theoretically. So it really helps build a structured benefit risk framework from very early in development. And if you look at the dimensions that are being considered and what the definition of risks, so in terms of outcomes, right, risk outcomes, and how to manage them and how to implement these strategies, that is actually what you want to have in a development RMP. So the BRAD can serve as a development RMP in cases where companies or teams don't yet have that. And it can be aligned to the core data sheet very well. Talking about the services and strategies, I don't think I have to repeat all that. CIOMS XII, because of this focus on risks and how they are being managed, also ties in very well with other recent documents. Most importantly, the REMS logic model and GBP 16 revision 3, where the risk minimization and the holistic approach to defining the elements of a benefit risk structure, defining the elements of the outcomes and the effectiveness measures, and the multimodal evaluation, etc., and making clear that it's iterative, that it's a life cycle process. This fits in very well. These documents fit together, and maybe for some not immediately and not obviously, but if you look at it carefully, all this builds a continuum of activities and really supports each other. In terms of life cycle activity, BRAD should start early. It is defined as a life cycle document, obviously, and it supports benefit risk thinking from very early on, from the preclinical stage all the way to post-approval, with certain points in time where formal benefit risk assessments are being recommended or should be considered. And if you think about the classical benefit risk management, the life cycle activity, we will know these chevrons going from drug discovery all the way until post-authorization. Obviously, the thinking about benefit risk really should start here, well before we go into humans. And the considerations in the target product profile are absolutely supportive of developing a benefit risk framework. So if teams struggle with that, if they think they don't have data, they do have data before first in human, they do have a target product profile. And with the possible exception of cost, all these questions here refer to either benefit or risk of the profile. And obviously, if you take this seriously, talking about the target product profile, every company that does that should think about the ideal versus the acceptable target product profile, thereby addressing the uncertainties inherently. So this is a process that doesn't need to be reinvented, or that should come really, really naturally for companies. It just needs a little bit of a twist in thinking. Yeah, with that, I think I've reached the end. Ultimately, every decision is obviously individually. Every stakeholder has to take the decision and have to own their risks.
Thank you very much. So I do have a microphone to bring around the room if anyone has any questions for Michael. Anyone? Any questions? Comments? Appreciation? Yes? No? Not volunteering. But yes. Oh, but good. Okay, we've got a good in the room with the thumbs up. Anyone curious? Anything unclear? Thank you.
Hi Michael, thank you very much for that great summary, and it's fabulous to see this long project coming to fruition and really helping us in decision making. Can I just take you back briefly to your comment around only in very rare cases do we really need to add quantitative analysis for marginal decision making? I've worked in a slightly different spot, but I find that often I am in a position where one has to really balance very carefully and make a decision. Do we really have a benefit over the risk profiles that we have in the patient population as perhaps our biggest target? So can I just urge you to expand a bit more on that consideration, how rare the marginal decision making might be here?
Right. So, and I know it's of course, when I say about 20% or less than 20% of all the benefit risk assessments that I've seen really require the quantitative analysis. There are, of course, situations where it's needed. And I would say the two most important cases where you have to go for quantitative analysis is when the benefit risk profile, actually three, when the benefit risk the rationale why the benefits outweigh the risk is not so clear. This is the obvious one. The second one is if you have patient subgroups that differ dramatically. If you have patient subgroups that have a massive benefit and very little risk compared to some that obviously experience a lot of risk. The third one, if you have a massively different opinion about the benefits and the risk between different stakeholders, so if patients, healthcare providers, and regulators differ in their assessment. So then maybe there are a lot of reasons why this could happen. What I've seen most is either this difference in opinions about benefits and risks, or the fact that you have subgroups of patients that experience unacceptable risks. How can you define the benefit-risk profile for the overall population, and especially for this one? And there you really need to dig deep, and you have to find out what the different considerations, different factors contributing to the benefit-risk assessment are. Yeah.
Thank you. You have another question? I actually wonder, Michael, whether can you take the slide off the screen so we could actually see you in full, not a tiny little person at the top. That would be fab. Thank you. Hey, there you are. There you are.
Hi, my name is Dora Perger. Thank you very much for this presentation and on this very important topic. I wanted to clarify something about the target product profile. In the area I worked on, when we discussed target product profile, I was always sitting with my commercial colleagues. So when you talk about target product profile, what you actually mean, because when I did it, it was always the ideal situation, better than the comparator, and very number-driven, and not necessarily focusing on key risk, but a shopping list of things which commercial wanted to be included. So if you could clarify how that would feature in the benefit-risk assessment.
Yes. So if I think about target product profile, the way I did them over the years and was involved, there were always the questions about, what is, for example, in terms of clinical efficacy, what do we want to achieve? What level of reduction in certain disease outcomes? What level of increase in overall survival, progression-free survival in oncology do we want to achieve, do we have to achieve in order to have a product, right? That would be the ideal clinical efficacy. And then, of course, we also consider, well, if we don't achieve the ideal situation, like, at least say 2 years progression-free survival, what is the minimum we have to achieve? Is it 1 year, 1.5 years? So what is the uncertainty around this outcome that we can accept, so we still have a product? The same for the safety events. If we think about the same product that delivers a certain amount of say PFS, how many adverse events per patient year, at what degree can we accept, so that the product can still survive on the market, make it to the market and survive on the market. So that were the considerations from a development side. I know that DPPs very often focus on how much money can be made with it, what is the cost, and can it be a commercial product? An important consideration, because if a company cannot make money with the product, you probably shouldn't start developing it. But these other dimensions of the TPP, in my opinion, are very important. I know that not all companies do have that. Okay.
Thank you very much. We have another question.
Hello, my name is Anne-Marie Emgård, and I thought it was interesting also about communication and knowing your data. So I just wanted to touch upon that because I worked with a company which they got like preliminary start in US, and then they had to go back due to safety concerns for patients. But actually they managed, after they sort of run more analysis on the data and could see different subgroups. And just touching back to what you said about patient implications, because that was an oncology product, and as you know, of course, it could be what the regulators think are problematic, and then about how you as the patients are living your life, because that was that you were sort of dying earlier, and which always sounds bad. But what is your sort of input on, do you see regulators changing approach, because now they got okay again for US market, and just by showing data in other ways, and as well as putting in the patient impact and and not suffering so much before dying, but rather live good until you die.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's an important consideration. And I remember when I started out in patient safety in 2007, I mean, coming with patient-informed outcomes and talking about, say, the importance of PFS or OS, it was an absolute no-go. Nobody discussed this with you. Nowadays, you can certainly come and explain that patient quality of life, if this is well established, is an important endpoint and should be considered. And I mean, I think the most striking example of using patient preferences, informing a benefit risk framework with these patient preferences to calculate the weights of the outcomes. So not just the probabilities, but also the weighted probabilities, right, of outcomes is natalizumab. When it was taken off the market because of unacceptable adverse events, the PML risk, and was brought back to the market because patients said, we are dying anyway, we have an option here to be treated, not cured, but at least have a reduction in the frequency and severity of our MS events, of the progression of the disease, and how the product was brought back with stringent risk minimization activity. So really based on benefit on patient preferences. And I think this is something that is maybe underexplored and underutilized, but regulators are certainly willing to discuss this.
Thank you very much. We have another question.
Thank you. That was a really excellent presentation. It simplified it for my medical affairs brain, so thank you very much. So that bit about the patient's input, in your experience, how articulate or well informed are, presumably it's patient organisations that you're utilising. What's your experience of that? Maybe in the oncology space is slightly different, but I'd be interested too.
Yeah, the oncology space is different, but and in the oncology space it becomes particularly difficult because just the question, when do you ask patients about their preferences becomes important, right? Do you want to ask them before the treatment, during the treatment, while they experience the adverse events, after the treatment, after they've just finished some cycles of treatment, or maybe 2 years later when they if they survived, if they maybe their cancer is in remission. So this becomes a complicated question. Finding the right patients is difficult, and it's elucidating patient preferences requires very careful planning of the experiment. Just going for the patient organizations can be helpful to find patients. You may run into the problem of asking the well-informed patients to have this vocal minority that I mentioned, right? So it requires a lot of discussion there. What I think is important is that before you ask the patients, you have to make sure that they really understand what you're asking them. We worked on this was one of the first times, actually the first time I went into such an experiment. We worked on a drug that was intended to slow down the progression of Alzheimer's disease. And we saw that one of the key risks would be a stroke. And we tried to formulate a decision analytic experiment, conjoint analysis, to ask patients how much risk of stroke they were willing to accept. And the outcome was incredible. I mean, patients were willing to accept a huge amount of risk. And these were patients, patients who were just diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So they were still fully or quite aware of what was going on. Very early signs of Alzheimer's. And then we went back and analyzed that because we said that it's completely impossible that patients are willing to accept such a high risk of stroke. And when we analyzed the data and did follow-up experiments, we found out that patients, or many patients, had misinterpreted the question. They had thought stroke would only be fatal stroke. And their rationale was, I'm going to die from Alzheimer's, rather than having a slow and agonizing death, I'll be taken out in an instant if I have a stroke. And they didn't consider that most strokes are not fatal. And so the whole analysis ultimately was completely useless. And these are considerations you have to make, and you learn along the way. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question, if anyone is sitting on a really exciting question. Come on. Anyone? No? Well, I think you've managed to exhaust them, but thank you. That's been fantastic. I think we show a round of applause of our gratitude for that. Thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah, again, sorry I can't be there.
Yeah, well, we're sorry that you can't be here, but maybe next year that would be great. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.